decide to save more, and there's that lower spending. But then they say in their model that savings is equal to investment. And also remember C plus I plus G, investment. So if savings goes up, then investment goes up, then the spending goes up, right? So in their own model, it's in a contradiction where if people did decide to save more, then investment would go up. So there's actually something structurally wrong with Keynesianism. So I discussed the Santa Claus fallacy. What's wrong with the Santa Claus fallacy is that government doesn't have these magical resources. They can't tax, the people on the moon to help the American economy or something like that. They have to get those resources from their own economy. So the only way that the government can spend anything is to first either tax it, or borrow it, or print it. So if you tax, let's say Steve's a rich guy. I think Steve has too much and the rest of you guys aren't spending it. Well, I've got to tax Steve first, and in order to give you guys money, just to hire gatherers. Well, it doesn't take into effect. What was Steve going to do if I didn't tax that money? Well, he was probably going to spend it on something, either to consume for himself or he was going to invest it. The reason he's probably richer than the rest of us is because he was really good at investing. And so by him investing it, that would have created jobs, right? So by taxing it, we're not really helping the economy. And there's a lot of empirical evidence that shows that higher tax rates are not good for the economy. Even by Keynesians can show that. All right, so what about borrowing? Well, it's the same thing. If Steve, instead of taxing Steve, what if I decide to borrow money? Well, I still have to borrow money that Steve would have invested in some other way, right? And so then, again, you have the problem, well, which would have been better for the economy? If Steve would have invested it or directly, or if I would have invested money for Steve in some government project, or print it. Well, that also has problems. In the short run, it might feel good, but it still can cause inflation in the road. Or again, it gets to the problem though. There's always the opportunity cost. The real cost of government spending isn't how much it collects in taxes. The real cost of government spending is how much it spends. If the government spends any resources, it takes those resources out of the private sector and then uses it in its own way. So there's a study that came out in 2007 by two economists married, Christina and David Romer, and it's really ironic that this study found that the multiplier for government spending is negative. And they're hardcore Keynesians. In fact, Christina Romer crafted Obama's stimulus package. Right? When she crafted it, she thought that there would be a multiplier of like 1.53, which I think is really ironic, like to get to that specific of a level. But in her own paper, that she had written a year before, she found that government spending, empirically, government spending was negative because a lot of times the multipliers just look at, well, what is the positive effect of the spending? But again, that's the Santa Claus fallacy. It ignores, well, where did that money come from? And what they did is they looked at when you had to borrow money or raise taxes, the negative effect, there's a negative multiplier, divisor, I guess, of when the government collected $1 through taxes, the economy contracted by $2 to $3. That's much bigger than the 1.5 that she was looking at as the spending side, right? So, but did that change her mind? Did she, disavow Keynesianism? No. think Steve's going to talk about religion, so I think this is one thing that's really ironic, is that economics can be a religion too, and who do we choose to worship is important. So the three criteria that are given for government spending, for counter-cyclical policy for the government to spend in recession, is that it has to be timely, targeted, and temporary. Okay, try not to laugh. Timely, let's look at the first one. Timely government spending, all right. You guys know the legislative process to some degree. I mean, look at how ridiculous Congress works, right? Very rarely, from the time that a bill gets proposed and passed and goes through the meat grinder and then finally gets deployed and approved by the House and all this stuff, money has to get allocated. That takes so long that oftentimes the recession is over by the time that even happens, right? Now, you could say, okay, maybe the stimulus bill, which I think kicked in February 2009, maybe that was timely. And hey, it looked like it worked because that was the low point in the recession. After February 2009, I think the economy started to reverse trend a little bit. Well, most of the money that was allocated wasn't even spent until years later. Like a third was spent in the first year, a third was spent in the second year, a third was spent in the 3 years out or something, right? So how timely is that? Another thing is a lot of times people like to propose the idea of these public works projects, but the amount of time required to put something together like that, first you have to decide what projects get built, and then it takes a lot of time. You have to do like environmental impact studies and all these different kinds of things. So just to even break ground on a project like this will take about 8 months. And again, most recessions are over 6 to 8 months. So this is, in fact, we heard this gaffe from Obama himself. He said, well, it looks like these were not really shovel-ready projects or something like that, right? But, so this is an admission that there is hardly such thing as a timely policy. A few exceptions would either be like immediate tax cuts or direct fiscal transfers could possibly be timely. But in terms of real spending, you know, either in investment or infrastructure or anything like that, forget about it. It's just not going to happen. Targeted, I guess, would mean that you're supposed to target the people who are unemployed. So in the current recession, you could say it would be like the government hiring all the home builders and mortgage financiers. Right? Well, that's going to be a problem because just because you have some labor skills in physical labor because you're a home builder doesn't mean you're qualified to do whatever projects the government can think of. You know, driving a bulldozer or whatever for a government infrastructure project is not the same as building a house. These are not just interchangeable jobs. And what's even more ironic is that what you found, there were studies done by Mercatus that found that when the government, the effect of the stimulus package showed that the government didn't hire people from the unemployment line. What ended up happening when they did the survey, they found that employers were hiring people that were already employed. And it wasn't even a pay increase. Usually it was just the difference of benefits. So you're making $20 an hour at this job, and you move to $20 an hour with benefits. Right? And so it didn't even hire the unemployed. So it wasn't targeted at all, right? And the other is temporary. Well, there's two things that are imaginary: is unicorns and temporary government spending. That's a little unfair, but I have seen unicorns. No, government spending rarely rarely goes down. I mean, it might go down a little bit, but it'll rarely go back down to the level it was before. Oftentimes, what gets created in these countercyclical policies is that new agencies will get built, or new permanent jobs get created. So the government really just grows in size permanently. So this timely, targeted, and temporary, the only thing that could really qualify, like I said, maybe are immediate tax cuts or direct fiscal transfers. But then again, that causes a problem. There's economic literature that shows that a temporary tax cut might not really do so much because it's temporary. And so people will know that if you're just giving me a break for this year, that I can't really do any long-term planning because the long-term prospects are the same as before. So temporary might not even be an ideal solution in that situation, right? So another problem is that you kind of touched on when I said that you can't really target the unemployed always and fix the problem, because the reason is that capital and labor are heterogeneous. They're very specific. If you have certain kinds of capital are very specific, that maybe they can only do one sort of thing. And people with job skills have very specific job skills. And even if they have very generic job skills, that doesn't mean that they're going to match up with the capital that is needed for those jobs, right? So the government is going to be a very important matchmaker between labor and capital, and merging these two into a productive investment. And so, well, we could say maybe, okay, so there's a mismatch between labor skills and demand, then the government should use job training programs. But empirically, these are failures, massive failures. I mean, the people who choose to go to an 8-month job training program, at the end, and first of all, the ones that even the success ratio of completing it is really low. The ones who did complete it don't earn any more than the people who opted out of the program. So their starting wage wasn't any higher. The people who opted out of the program in that 8-month period, they built up job skills and got promoted. So at the end of the 8 months, they were earning more, plus they were getting paid the whole time more probably than the job skills out of the government. So they're getting paid more productively and earn more job skills than people who chose to do the training program. So the best way to get job training is on-the-job training, right? And the government is a very poor substitute for that. Well, what if the government decides, okay, we have all these projects, we know that, when recession comes, it takes 8 months, so what we'll do is we'll save up all of this, we'll put in this little inventory all these projects that need to be reconstructed or renovated, and then when the next recession comes, we have everything just ready, right? Well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, if a bridge needs to be rebuilt, it doesn't make sense to wait until the next recession. I mean, it might be dangerous until then, or roads or anything. I mean, if you can count infrastructure as capital should be maintained through its life cycle. It shouldn't, wait until it gets fully depreciated. And so, it's also, well, what if the government hoards the raw materials, the gravel, the concrete, and all this stuff? Well, again, that's pulling resources out of the private sector that would have been spent more productively in the boom time, and that just accelerates. It's going to raise the prices then. It's going to accelerate the process and bring about the recession that you're trying to prepare for. This is the irony, is that government can't do that. The same thing if they hoard raw or if they hoard money, it's the same thing. If the government runs perpetual surpluses, but doesn't use that to pay down debt and pay out, right? They just increase the treasury's vault. There's going to be less money in the private sector, and we might also have a recession of that. So really, there's not much the government can do there. But what are some more consequences? Well, there's malinvestment. Like I said, the government's a poor matchmaker for labor and capital. The government will lack the knowledge of what are profitable investments. $1 of equal. Okay, the Keynesian model, C plus I plus G, those are equal, right? It's considered $1 of government spending is the same as private spending, but that's really not true. There's something in economics called Pareto optimality. Pareto is an Italian economist mathematician who talked about how something is optimal if no one is made worse off, but everyone is made better off. And so, if I buy a donut from Steve for $1, he wants my dollar and I want the donut, and we're both better off for it. Right? But if I decide to steal his donut and then offer him $1 later, maybe that donut was worth $2 to him. Unless the interaction is voluntary, there's no way to know. And so the other problem is cronyism that occurs with the government spending on these projects. The politically favored people are going to have access to writing the legislation. How does the money get spent? And then you get these things like Solyndra and all the public works stuff, the contractors that get access to the public money. So to wrap it up, the two paradoxes of Keynesianism, the two things that I find are just inherently wrong. We can make empirical arguments against it that it doesn't do what it's supposed to say, but even from a logical basis, there are two paradoxes. One is that investment is spending, and aggregate spending is what creates demand. And savings equals investment, even in the Keynesian model. So therefore, savings increases at aggregate demand. So you can't have too much savings, even in the Keynesian model. When they explain it verbally, they say that it can, but when they write it up in the model, they say that that's impossible through an accounting identity. And so therefore, the paradox of thrift is a paradox by way of internal contradiction with the accounting identity model. And then the second paradox is that the cause is diagnosed as too little purchasing power of households. But the solution, the Keynesian solution, is to reduce their purchasing power through inflation. So they say that people don't have enough money or purchasing power to buy everything that's being produced. The solution is to create more inflation and trick them into accepting lower wages. Right? They say that wages are sticky, so workers need to be tricked. And therefore, an intellectually honest Keynesian will admit that either unions and minimum wage laws cause unemployment and sticky wages, or their theory is incorrect. And so this is really inconvenient for the politically left-aligned Keynesian whose policies create inequality and create unemployment. Right? Unfortunately, most left-leaning Keynesians, I don't know if they actually believe it or if they don't realize the contradiction in their argument that they support the minimum wage and the Keynesian model. That just doesn't make sense. So, does anyone have any questions on government spending and the efficacy of it? If not, then
Just one quick point. If you want to read something really funny, go back and find Ezra Klein, of course, is a journalist at the Washington Post. organizer of the effort by journalists to make Obama look good during the 2008 election called Journo-list. If you ever read something interesting, go back and look up Journo-list. You can Google that. Anyway, Ezra Klein wrote a piece, and he was essentially trying to, and this gets into your idea, which of course is relevant to us, of Keynesianism as a religion. He got into, you've heard the famous phrase, communism hasn't failed because nobody's really tried it yet. In this case, he said, well, the problem is that nobody's really tried Keynesianism because, and he accurately points out that, well, if part of Keynesianism is and I'm simplifying it, but essentially you borrow money to spend it now to pump up the economy, but then when the economy is better off, then you have to pay back that money, so the next time around you can borrow money again, And of course, nobody ever says, now we're going to deliberately depress the economy so that in the future we'll be able to stimulate it again by paying this money back. And so he points out all these problems with what politicians have done with Keynesianism, and then just says, maybe this next time, coming up, we can just do it without making all those mistakes.
Right.
Even though, of course, they're inherent in the way the theory it plays out in any kind of political world. So anyway, so if you want to get a big laugh, you can go back and look up Ezra Klein.
I'd say Keynesianism is flawed in theory and even worse in practice.
Yes, exactly.
That's how I put it, yeah. Because the political process is terrible. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Justin. Before I get started, I just wanted to, this is the last service we're having this year, so I just wanted to sort of summarize where we've come. It started at the beginning of this year. We had this idea: how could you make a religion out of the ideas of liberty? How could you build a community around it? We met once or twice a month through the spring, and we started in June having services, and we've had pretty much one every month since then. We've had some social activities too, and we have this bus tour coming up next week. So overall, I'd say I'm pretty happy with where we've come. It was always the plan to start slow and be deliberate and be, this is a new idea. So how do you have a service? How do you have a religion that doesn't have a metaphysical basis to it? I mean, how do you build that? So we didn't want to make it a big deal right away. We wanted to take our time. And that's what we've done. So, I think we're on a good trajectory here. And looking into 2014, hopefully it continues to grow in momentum. What I'm looking at right now is we're going to continue to have these services once a month through the spring next year. And then hopefully in the early summer, maybe start doing more frequent services, twice a month. And then maybe in the late summer, early fall, start actually having weekly services. The idea here is, and we'll also have social events, we'll also hopefully start doing service activities, community events, things that are fun, but are also ways for us to get our name out there and to sort of project our values in the community. So if anyone has any ideas of things we can do, this idea was quoted about handing out jury notification flyers at the courthouse. I think that is, it's kind of a fun activity, but it's also very consistent with our values. The idea is to have a community built around liberty. I don't think we're quite there. We're all friends, but I wouldn't say this is really a community. It hasn't really ignited yet. So hopefully we can move toward more in that direction next year as the year progresses. Beyond the idea of promoting, rolling back the state and the free market, my perspective about where we want to take the Church of Praxeology is just a metaphor I use is it's assembly line of philosophical truths. So you think about the assembly line, the manufacturing process revolutionized how efficiently you can produce material goods. In the same way, the idea of the Church of Praxeology is to have a way to transmit philosophical truths to large numbers of people. So even beyond the free market, the anti-state stuff, how do you push out really important philosophy that a lot of people have wrong ideas on? The fact of the matter is that most people are not so interested in philosophy that they're going to go out and buy a book of philosophy. It's just not going to happen. And so therefore, but everyone has a philosophy, and your philosophy is important because you make your decisions based on your philosophy. So the idea of the church is having professional philosophers, which would be the clergy, who are interested in reading a lot and thinking about these ideas, to present them in a way that people can use. That it's an hour a week you come, and it's not you have to read through a tome and maybe get some insights. It's an hour a week you come. It's a social event. You see your friends there, and by the way, you get some really good takeaways from a professional philosopher. So that's sort of a perspective, where I hope to take this eventually. So to that end, I want to talk about a philosopher I've been reading a lot about recently, or whose work I've been reading a lot recently, who had some really interesting things to say about religion and God and Christianity and things that are relevant to the Church of Praxeology. The philosopher is Friedrich Nietzsche. Probably everyone has heard his name, maybe you've read some of his stuff. So I'll just give you an introduction to who he was and then go into his ideas. Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher. He was born in 1844. He was born into a Lutheran family. His father was a Lutheran minister, so he was raised very religious, very steeped in the traditions of Christianity. And he was a brilliant student. He was such a bright student that he was offered a full tenured professorship at the age of 24 at the University of Basel, which is amazing to think about, a tenured professor at 24. And he's still one of the youngest to ever have gotten tenure at such an early age. He was offered a position in classical philology, which it's not really a term that's used much these days, but it's the study of classical civilizations, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And technically it's the study of the writings of those civilizations, but really it's just, it's a classical historian. So Nietzsche taught for 10 years, and then eventually he left and became a full-time philosopher. Now, one thing that Nietzsche is probably most well known for is his famous expression that God is dead. That's an expression of what he saw as a philosopher, looking at the intellectual environment that he lived in. I mean, he knew Western civilization from back to the ancient classic civilizations. And he saw the development of Christianity, and he saw what was happening with the Enlightenment. Basically, this idea was that the ideas of the Enlightenment had killed Christianity, killed God. And he saw the increasing secularization that was happening even then 150 years ago, which continues to this day. Europe is much more secular now than it was 300 years ago. The U.S. is also more secular, although we're probably a few generations behind, but that seems like the direction we're moving, despite the Christians attempting to stop this. Now you might say, okay, well, what did Nietzsche think about the idea that God was dead? He gave expression to what he saw, but he was raised Christian. Was he happy that God was dead? Or was he admonishing people saying God is dead, we need to resurrect him? The answer is that he was happy that God was dead. In fact, all of his works are continuous attacks on the Christian God, and it was almost like he's metaphorically putting his own nails in the coffin. He hated the Christian God, he hated Christianity. Why was that? That's quite a reversal from the fact, his father was a Lutheran minister. So what was it that made him hate Christianity so much? Well, as he matured and he started to look at the attributes of Christianity, he started to say all of these things that Christianity holds up as virtues are things that you would instinctively, naturally, you would think are, they're against your instinct, they're against your nature. Everything that Christianity holds up in his mind, his perspective, everything that Christianity holds up as a virtue is something that deprives you of strength, deprives you of power. So I'll just give you some examples. This idea that the meek will inherit the earth. If I'm not meek, and somebody says the meek are going to inherit the earth, how does that make me feel? It knocks me down a bit, I start wondering about that. Or what if I'm just going through my life happy, contented, and someone comes up with this idea that you know, you're a sinner. You should be guilty. You know, it takes you down. You start wondering, I'm a sinner? Well, I mean, or this idea, you know, that you should become like a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. You know, well, I'm happy that I'm an adult. I'm happy that I'm mature. Why would I want to go back and be a child again? I mean, so